Welcome to In His Grip with Dr. Chuck F. Betters of markinc.org. Visit markinc.org, where you'll discover many free resources, videos, devotionals, and more that will equip you to walk by faith and offer help and hope. You can also find out about our online biblical counseling service. That's markinc.org.
If your children have the grid of Scripture, they will know what's true versus what is counterfeit. We're told by those who are in the banking industry that one of the ways in which they teach their tellers and other people that handle money on a daily basis how to spot a counterfeit is they never show them a counterfeit. They show them what the true dollar bill looks like. They learn that image so that when the counterfeit is there, it sticks out like a sore thumb. This couldn't possibly be a worthy piece of money. This is a counterfeit. Because once you know what the truth is, the counterfeit does stick out like a sore thumb. So we teach our children the truth. We teach it again and again. That's God's wisdom. Jesus is called the Logos, the truth of God. That's what the word Logos means. That's why Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. The truth, the Logos, the basis of what is true, the grid through which we define truth. That Logos, that Word of God became flesh, we're told in John 1. The Word became flesh. We call him the incarnate Word. Well, what are the Scriptures? The Scriptures are the written Word, the written truth, the written Logos. That's wisdom. That's what the Bible means when it speaks of wisdom. It speaks of our relationship to Christ, who is our high priest, who was tempted in every point like unto us. You have never experienced a temptation that Christ hasn't already experienced. He's already gone through what you're going through. He's already been tested, yet without sin. This is the wisdom of God. This is how God views things. This is what God believes needs to be done. This is what God does in face of a similar temptation. This is what he did when he overcame sin. Well, now, as the chapter unfolds, he begins to show us the degeneration or the moral spiral of this young man who basically rejected all he was taught in the first 6 chapters. And we learn something from this. We learn that only one who fears God and learns to hate what God hates will be able to stand alone when he must. Only the man, only the woman, only the teenager who fears God and has learned at an early age to hate the very same things that God hates will, when faced with moral temptation, be able to stand alone. All others will drop to their knees before the idols and gods of this world. Follow along as we watch our young man fall into great, great sin, and you'll quickly see what went wrong. And as parents, hopefully you will learn what you need to be teaching your children when faced with similar temptations. This is a child who refused to stand alone. First of all, look at verses 6 and 7. He says, if you're in Proverbs 7, follow along with me as we go through each of these. He says, at the window of my house, I looked out through the lattice. I saw among the simple, I noticed among the young men, a youth who lacked judgment. Now, it's going to be very interesting for you to understand there is a distinction between wisdom, judgment, understanding, discretion, insight. These are words that are used, we think they're used interchangeably, but they're not. They're words that build for us an understanding of exactly what the wisdom of God must now become in each of our children. If your kids lack wisdom, if your kids lack understanding, if your kids lack judgment, they will not be able to stand alone. Wisdom, understanding, and judgment. What do we mean by that? Go back to Proverbs chapter 2 and look with me beginning at verse 1. Proverbs 2, again, this is a principle this young man ignored. He said, my son, chapter 2, verse 1, if you accept my words and store up my commands within you, turning your ear to wisdom and applying your heart to understanding, there's those two words. And if you call out for insight, that's another word, and cry aloud for understanding, and if you look for it as for silver and search for it as for hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord. Then you will find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom, and from his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. He holds victory in store for the upright. He is a shield to those whose walk is blameless, for he guards the course of the just and protects the way of his faithful ones. Again and again and again, Solomon will remind his child of three things: wisdom, understanding, and judgment. Wisdom I've already defined for you. It's what God sees, what God's perspective is. It's what the truth is concerning the situation you or your children are facing. If your child, for example, is faced with the temptation to steal, there should be no debate about the right or wrong of it, should there? Stealing is wrong. It's morally not acceptable. This is the wisdom of God. God has already declared what is right. God has already declared what is wrong. But now your child must move from not only what he knows to be right and wrong, but he needs to move to what Solomon refers to as understanding. I like to refer to this as ethos. Logos is the truth. Ethos is the ethical demand of that truth. You'll notice in the great Apostle Paul's epistles, in just about all of them, he starts out with a section on doctrine. Like Ephesians chapters 1 through 3, it's all doctrine. Here's the truth, chapter 1. Here's the truth, chapter 2. Here's the truth, chapter 3. But then when he comes to the second half of his books, he shifts gears. And he says, this is what you now must do with the doctrine I just taught you. Here is the ethos. You hear the word ethical there. The ethical demand of the truth. Here is what God says you must do. Here is the truth of what is right and wrong. And now here is what you must do with that truth. This is what Solomon is referring to when he talks about understanding. Applying the truth. Putting feet to your theology. Knowing how to act when you have heard what the truth is. And then there's a third aspect, closely connected with understanding. It's the aspect of the word he calls judgment. You know what judgment is? There's no other way to describe it. I think the most simple way to describe judgment is this. Do you know how to read the mail? Have you read the mail? You're in a situation right now. Here you are. You're surrounded. You're in a situation. Have you read the circumstances? Do you know where you are? Do you know what's going to happen if you go this way versus if you go that way? Do you know how you got there in the first place? Do you have any business being there? If logos is the truth, if ethos is the ethical demand of that truth, then judgment becomes an assessment. How did I get here? What did I violate? What is the road back? What's the first step I need to take to get out of this mess that I now find myself in? All three of those need to be taught in tandem with your kids. If you only fill their minds with scriptural content and never show them how that content applies ethically and how to read the mail when they're face to face with difficult situations, they're never ever going to be able to stand alone. Secondly, your kids will not stand alone when they are idle with a vacant and a loitering mind. A vacant and a loitering mind. Because you see, when their minds are loitering, when their minds are vacant, when they're not thinking, this is when they let down their guard, they lose their spiritual restraints, that originally would have kept them from ending up where they didn't belong in the first place. But those restraints are now gone because their minds have become idle. Their minds have vacated the truth. Teachers will tell you this. When a teacher is teaching, and I can tell you as a preacher, when a preacher is preaching, I can look into your eyes and I can tell whether or not you're paying attention. I can look into your faces and see whether or not, as a teacher can, I can see in your faces where you have become blank, where you're no longer thinking. You're thinking over here about something else, and your mind has vacated the truth. You've moved away from what you should be thinking about, and now you're over here and you've drifted. A teacher will tell you that. He or she will look out at the student, and he's now writing up on the board something that kid's going to need in a couple of weeks on an exam, and he knows that kid's going to need it. He's writing it out, and he looks out, and there's the one or the two that are drifted. Their minds have vacated. You're going to need this someday. You're going to need this someday. This is what a father needs to do with a child. He needs to say to that child, look at me. Look into my eyes. Sense the urgency of the moment. That's why he tells us in verses 8 and 9, here he is. He was going down the street near her corner, walking along in the direction of her house at twilight, as the day was fading, as the dark of night set in. Pick up a couple of thoughts here. It's called her corner. It's not his corner. It's her corner. He has now drifted out of his turf and onto her turf. He has now moved into a very difficult situation. He has gone near her corner. He's not quite there yet. And it's not yet dark. It's almost dark. It's twilight. And so you see this man beginning to walk to where he has no business being. And yet there's still time. There's still time to salvage the sin that he's already committed. There's still time to move away. But now he's going down to her corner. He's drifting. His mind has lost focus. He's vacated the truth. He's not thinking proactively and spiritually anymore. He forgot what his dad told him in Proverbs chapter 4. So go back to Proverbs 4 and look with me at verse 20. He says, my son, I love this. With my wife, we've raised 4 kids. One is now safely deposited in heaven. And the other 3 are all serving the Lord and raising their kids better than we raised them. And that's the way it's supposed to be. And I look back on those many, many days in which I said the same thing to my kids. I could almost hear Solomon saying this, verse 20 of Proverbs 4. My son, pay attention to what I say. Listen closely to my words. Catch the urgency. Do not let them out of your sight. Keep them within your heart, for their life to those who find them and health to a man's body. In other words, son, you're going to need this someday. You may not think you need it right now, but you're going to need it someday. Someday you're going to remember, I told you so. And I'm not one of those dads that would say to my kids, don't worry, I'm never going to say I told you so, because I promised my kids I would always tell them, I told you so. I told you so. Look at me. When they're real little, you have to get down to right where they are. Look into my eyes. You're going to need this someday. This corner is her corner, and it's off limits to you. You can't go near that corner. You need to stay as far away from that corner as possible, because he continues there in verse 22 or 23. Above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. Verse 24, Proverbs 4. Put away perversity from your mouth. Keep corrupt talk from your lips. Let your eyes look straight ahead. Fix your gaze directly before you. Make level paths for your feet, and only take ways that are firm. Do not swerve to the right. Do not swerve to the left. Keep your foot from evil. You ever wonder why these racehorses, some of them wear blinders? You know why a racehorse wears blinders? Because he's racing. His eyes need to be fixed on one thing, the goal line. the finish line. If he looks to the right and sees his buddy horse over here, or if he looks to the left and sees his girlfriend horse over here, and he swerves back and forth, you know what happens when he looks to the right? You know what happens when he looks to the left? He slows down. He loses stamina. He's just moving his wheels, so to speak, spinning his wheels because he's looked to the right or he's looked to the left. This is what happens when our kids go near that corner. Their blinders have been removed. Their minds have been vacated. And thirdly, they will not stand alone if they do not recognize spiritual yellow lights. And you know what happens? What's a yellow light mean? Slow down. Why? Because a red light is about to flash. You know, in Delaware now, we have Big Brother watching us, don't we? If the yellow light turns yellow, and if it turns red while you're through that intersection, you're going to get a little piece of mail a few days later. You're going to get a nice hefty fine because the light turns red after it turns yellow. You've got to learn that when the lights have turned yellow, it's about to turn red, and you need to slow down and assess the situation. Your kids will never learn to stand alone if they don't learn what those yellow lights are and what those red lights are. Look at Proverbs 7 again. Let's watch our young man on his journey, beginning with verse 10. Then out came a woman to meet him, dressed like a prostitute. Now, by the way, she's not a prostitute. The scriptural context is clear. This is not a prostitute. She's just dressing like one. You're going to see later on she's a married woman. She's dressed like a prostitute and with crafty intent. Parenthetically, I have a feeling, although it doesn't tell us this, that young man's been to that corner before. When you study the details of what she says to him, I think she's been scoping him out for some time. Watch it. Watch what happens. Dressed like a prostitute with crafty intent. Here's the parentheses. Solomon says, by the way, footnote, she is loud and defiant. Her feet never stay at home. Now in the street, now in the squares, at every corner she lurks. She took hold of him and kissed him. And with a brazen face, she said, I have fellowship offerings at home. Today I fulfilled my vows. You know what she's doing here? She's putting a religious spin on this. That's what that means. She's somehow justifying that this is okay. Because, I paid my vows. I went to church today. We're weighing our works here. I did so many good things today. God must be pleased. So I'll do this one bad thing, and it's no big deal because the scales are still tipped in my favor, right? Wrong. She makes a religious spin to this. And here's this simple fool falling hook, line, and sinker for every word. You see, he forgot what his dad taught him in Proverbs 5, where he says in verse 7, now then, my sons, listen to me. Do not turn aside from what I say. Keep to a path far from her. Do not go near the door of her house. Let me explain. There's a road that leads from where this boy is to her corner. There's also another road over here that leads to life. And he stands at the crossroads. God is saying to him, don't even begin to turn away from this road to life, because you see, that's when sin happens. Sin does not happen when you get there. You've already sinned way back here when you made the determination to turn away from the path that leads to life. And so his dad warns him, don't even make that turn. Eyes straight ahead on the pathway to life. This is where you need to be heading. Don't even turn to go there. You're no match for this woman. She's way beyond you. She'll have you for lunch. You have no business debating her. And he forgot that. Or he didn't listen to it. Either way, he has now already sinned because he made the turn, and he's strolling along. And it's not yet dark. The yellow lights are flashing. The red lights are flashing. And he refuses to see. Your kids will never stand alone if they are infatuated with the pleasant appearances of sin. And boy, is sin, doesn't it appear to us very pleasantly. Look what he says in Proverbs 7, verse 15. He says, "So I came out to meet you," she says. "I looked for you." See, that indicates to me she knew this boy. He'd been there before. "I looked for you. I found you. I've covered my bed with colored linens from Egypt. I've perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let us drink deep of love till morning. Let's enjoy ourselves with love." Sounds really good, doesn't it? The appearances are pleasurable. But he forgot what his daddy told him in Proverbs chapter 5, verse 1. He said, "My son, pay attention to my wisdom. Listen well to the words of my insight, that you may maintain discretion and your lips may preserve knowledge." And then he told him this. Well before he was 13, he told him this. He says, "The lips of an adulteress drip honey." Now, what does honey taste like? Is it sweet or is it sour? It's sweet. Honey is sweet. Her speech is smoother than oil. Oil was a luxury, not a staple. Honey, oil. But he forgot what else his dad told him. "But in the end, she is as bitter as gall, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lead straight to the grave. She gives no thought to the way of life. Her paths are crooked, but she knows it not," meaning very simply, and she doesn't care. Your kids will never stand alone if they are caught up in the honey, caught up in the oil. You know where that starts? That starts with how you dress them and who their heroes are and the friends you let them hang around with and how important sexual activity is to them. That starts way back when you start talking to your kids about how cute they are. And I'm not saying you shouldn't say how cute your kids are. I tell my grandkids all the time how cute they are. But there's a way in which you can convey that your cuteness is what makes you who you are. And your cuteness does not make you who you are. You're much more valuable than how cute you are. There's something much deeper into whether or not your body is looking the same way that everyone else's body is supposed to look. Who are your kids infatuated with? What pleasures, what appearances of sin really catch hold of them? So when he gets to her corner, she's throwing out the honey. She's throwing out the speech. She's painting the picture of what it's going to be like when they leave that street corner and go into her house. She's described for him what her bed looks like. Listen to me, friends. The Bible tells us that Satan, like a hungry, roaring lion, roams about seeking whom he may devour. Remember our buddy Peter? Remember when Jesus spoke of death and the cross and going and being delivered up into the hands of sinful men? What did Peter say? "No, Lord, not as long as I'm here. I've got things under control. I'll never let these things happen to you." Remember he said that? You remember what Jesus said in return to him? "Get thee behind me, Satan." Now, I don't believe he was calling Peter Satan, but I believe Satan was very real at that moment, and Jesus was having a direct conversation with the one who was putting these thoughts into Peter's ears. And then later he would say to Peter, "Peter, I've prayed for you." Do you know why, Peter, I've prayed for you? Because Satan has made a specific prayer request. He held his own prayer meeting, and he asked to sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for you, that you may stand when you are tempted, and more so, that having stood, you can then turn to your brothers who are facing similar temptations And because of the victory you've gained, you can now minister effectively to them. Because you see, Peter, it's not all about you. It's about what you're going to do with the victory that I've given you. Satan has desired every one of your kids, that he may sift them as wheat. But he has also prayed for them. Your kids will never stand alone as long as they do not recognize those spiritual yellow lights, those spiritual red lights, those appearances, those pleasant appearances of sin, and how luring and yet devastating they are. Your kids will not stand alone if they believe there is such a thing as a secret sin. Because those who believe there's such a thing as a secret sin have no fear of God. If you believe in secret sin, that what you do in private, nobody else knows about, somehow or another is excused, then you have no fear of God. You know what the word sin is in the Greek? Hamartia. You know what hamartia means? It means to miss the mark. It's the picture of an archer who's shooting at the target. And do you know what the target is? The target is the holiness of God. And there's only one who can hold that target, and that's God himself. So God holds this target called holiness, his character, his nature. And every time you shoot an arrow and you miss that target called sin, even though no one else around you sees it, even though no one else is home, God sees it. That's why I tell you, there's no such thing as a secret sin. What we do in secret, Satan is going to take and shout from the housetops. Notice what happens next in verse 19 of chapter 7. She says, my husband, notice she's married, my husband is not at home. He's on a business trip. He's not going to be home for a long time. He even took his credit cards with him. Now, these are all my translations, but you can read it and you can see exactly what she's saying. You know what's wrong here? This young man is being sucked into the belief system that says, though my husband does not see what we're going to do, since he's not home to witness the act, what we do when we go behind those closed doors, no one else is going to know about, so it's in secret. You know what this boy forgot? The foundation of everything else his dad taught him in Proverbs 1:7, where he says, here's the summation of the whole thing, buddy. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. Your kids will not stand alone if they do not know or if they disregard the consequences of moral failure. Proverbs 7 verse 21 says, with persuasive words, she led him astray. She seduced him with her smooth talk. All at once, there's a suddenness to this. The snake bit him. The snake that was coiled the whole time bit him. He didn't think it would. He grew very comfortable with that coiled snake. All at once, he followed her like an ox going to the slaughter. Did you ever pass a truckload of cows or a truckload of chickens? You know where they're going? They're going to become your steak. They're going to become your breakfast. They're on their way to death. This is the picture that he paints of this boy. Like an ox going to the slaughter, like a deer stepping into a noose, till an arrow pierces his liver, like a bird darting into a snare, little knowing it will cost him his life. You see, his dad tried to tell him this in Proverbs 5, that there are consequences to moral failure. In verse 9 of chapter 5, he told him, you're going to give your best strength to others and your years to one who is cruel. Strangers are going to feast on your wealth, and your toil will enrich another man's house. At the end of your life, you will groan. When your flesh and body are spent, you will say, how I hated discipline. How my heart spurned correction. I would not obey my teachers or listen to my instructors. I have come to the brink of utter ruin in the midst of the whole assembly. You see, his dad tried to teach him this. His dad tried to tell him this, that there are consequences to moral failure. And the consequences are severe, and they come suddenly. Suddenly, you're bitten. Suddenly, you're trapped. And you're like that bird flapping your wings inside of that net, and there's nowhere to go. but to the slaughterhouse. Your kids will never learn to stand alone unless you also teach them the testimonies of others who have fallen. And as you teach them to learn to hate what God hates. He tried to tell him this in Proverbs 6. He tried to say to him, hate the things that God hates. Look what he says in Proverbs 7, verse 24. Now then, my sons, listen to me. Pay attention to what I say. Do not let your heart turn to her ways or stray into her paths. Why? Many are the victims she has brought down. Her slain are a mighty throng. Her house is a highway to the grave, leading down to the chambers of death. I tried to tell you this, son. I tried to tell you the story of the pride of Haman. Because you see, in Proverbs 6, it says there are 6 things the Lord hates, and 7 are detestable to him. Haughty eyes, or the proud look. Remember Haman? A lying tongue. Remember what happened to Gehazi and Ananias and Sapphira? Hands that shed innocent blood. Look at what sin did in nailing Jesus to that cross, the innocent dying for the guilty. A heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a man who stirs up dissension among brothers. Haven't I taught you the cost of dissension? Haven't I taught you the pain of conflict that is not resolved the right way? Whatever you're struggling with right now, there's a right way and there's a wrong way to handle it. Why would you go to her corner? What business do you have being there? You see, chapter 7 is the picture of a kid who didn't get it. He just didn't get it. It's the picture of what will happen to your children if they do not understand these principles, if they don't get it. One day, you'll be looking at them flapping their wings inside of a net into which they have been snared and trapped with nowhere to go. Rest assured of this, Satan knows how to pray better than you know how to pray. Satan knows how to stand before God day and night and accuse you and accuse your kids. He knows how to do that. He's a master at it. And he has prayed for that hedge of protection to come down so that he can have at your kids. This is nothing to play with. This is something to take very seriously, especially in light of the divided culture into which your kids are now being raised. It's never been this bad. I know every generation says it, but every generation has been wrong. This is the right way to say it. This is the truth. Your kids are being raised in a very difficult, very morally challenging culture where right has been lost and wrong has been honored and embraced. And we look at it today and we see our kids buying in, being lured, taking their stroll with their hands in their pockets. Slowly, yes, the lights are blinking, but they're heading toward her corner. And the sin's already been committed way back here. There is a path to life. That is the challenge of parenthood, isn't it? You're not going to know that if you do not invest the energy and time into teaching your children the authority of Scripture.
You've been listening to Dr. Chuck F. Betters in this program brought to you by MarkInc.org, proclaiming the truth that God is sovereign and you can trust Him. Please visit us online at MarkInc.org to learn about other free resources, such as our Help and Hope personal stories addressing a variety of topics and difficult circumstances. Hear answers to tough questions about suffering and the sovereignty of God in our Ask Dr. Betters video series. Receive encouraging devotionals from Daily Treasure, and more. Looking for help? We now offer online biblical counseling service through Anchored Hope Biblical Counseling, an online platform that will bring solid biblical counseling to those in need wherever and whenever they need it. Visit biblicalcounseling.online to make an appointment today.